Hey everyone, it's Jenny here and I'm excited to be joining you this month as part of Spellbinders' new release. I'm playing with the Buzzworthy Project Kit today, which is part of the release, and I'm going to be showing you how to create these 3 cards using products from the project kit and also available in the Spellbinders store. To get started for our first card, I'm using this stencil which features a really pretty honeycomb effect, and I'm going to be using it with the Fun Stampers Journey modelling paste and some acrylic paint. This is Lemon Drop. It's this really bright yellow colour. And I'm going to use some of the packaging from the stencil to mix out my medium that I'm going to be stenciling with. So I'm going to be mixing the acrylic paint with the modelling paste. They work well together. You can see just on the packaging here it says that you can mix acrylic paint with it. I tried it out and it works fantastically to give a beautifully coloured paste that you can use with your stencils. So I'm going to scoop some out with this Fun Stampers Journey spatula onto my packaging and then fold it into that acrylic paint, almost like creating some cake icing. And then I am going to go in and get a little bit more because I thought, you know what, I'm going to create 2 cards with this. I need a little bit more than I've got here. Just be sure to wipe off that spatula before you go back into the modelling paste pot to avoid adding any colour into the pot and contaminating it. To attach my stencil to my cardstock, I'm using some masking tape, which I'll attach at the back, and then that way I can get full coverage. I'm going for a all over coating of my cardstock without overlapping any of the tape if you attach it at the back. And just as a point of note, I'm using a £110 cardstock here. You want something sturdy that's going to be able to take the weight of that modelling paste. And then I'm just going to scoop up some with my spatula and then smooth it almost flat, slightly at an angle down from the top, and go back in and sort of spread it out just as if you were icing a cake. And then before I remove my stencil, I'm going to add a little bit of glitz. So I'm using some super fine gold glitter here. It is probably not that important to use fine glitter. I find that it adheres better to things like embossing paste and modelling paste, so I prefer to use it when I'm adding glitter over the top of projects like this. But you can experiment, and you'll see in my second card that I use slightly chunkier glitter. I'm just going to sprinkle it around. It looks like a hot mess right now, but you'll see once I tap off that excess glitter just to make sure it's all removed and then peel back that stencil, you're left with this fantastic glitzy kind of faded glitter look of a honeycomb. And I'm going to set that aside to dry. The modelling paste dries pretty quickly, I'd say 20-30 minutes, no more than that. Make sure that you wash your stencil and wipe up anything that you've got on your craft surfaces before you do anything else. Now I've gone and dunked my stencil into some water that I had down by the side of my desk, and because I still had some excess paste, I've grabbed the other stencil, which is the stained glass stencil from the kit, and another panel of £110 cardstock. I've attached it at the back, and before that paste on the packaging is dried, I'm going to smooth what's left of it into the centre. It probably, depending on how much you've got left, won't completely cover the panel, but it leaves a nice distressed look in the centre as a focal image or focal backdrop for a stamped image, and that's what we're going to do in a second. Before I remove the stencil, I'm coming back in with some glitter. This time I've got some slightly chunkier glitter. This is Vintage Platinum Distress Glitter. I'm going to sprinkle it over the top, tap off the excess, and then remove the stencil as I did before, setting it aside to dry. I like to use a sheet of old printer paper. This is just an old printout I've got that I flipped over just to protect my work surface. It makes for easier cleanup. And then I've removed the stencil, and look how pretty that is. When it dries, it holds that glitter on, and then you can rub your finger over the top once it's dried, and that glitter pretty much holds on. There might be a little bit of excess that comes off, but overall it stays on really well. Now, for the second card, I'm going to do some stamping, and I'm using the stamp set that comes in the kit. This is the Sweet as Honey stamp set. It's red rubber, so you need to remove the mouse pad or pad of paper that you might have in your stamp positioning tool. I'm using a panel of hot press watercolor cardstock here. Hot press is smoother than cold press. It's much better for stamping on. And I'm going to be using the Fun Stampers Journey black licorice ink to stamp my image. I do stamp it a couple of times just to get a good impression. It's waterproof, which means it's perfect for watercoloring with, which is how I'm going to color in my floral. And I'm just going to stamp it down twice. These red rubber stamps give a really, really crisp, clear impression. And I'm also, before I start my watercoloring, going to use that panel of cardstock just while I've got it in there. I'm going to use this Miss You sentiment. This is from the Block Prints stamp set that's also in the kit. It's got these really bold images and then some good blocky sentiments. Perfect for heat embossing, which of course I'm going to be doing. So I'm using some platinum embossing powder. I have treated my panel of cardstock with a powder tool first to avoid any static cling and having embossing powder sticking where I don't want it. I'm going to ink up my image, my sentiment stamp, with some embossing ink and then heat emboss it. Now, for watercolouring, I've just pulled out, I think I'm using my Magellan Mission Gold watercolours here. I'm going to be using a round brush and applying clean, clear water in the petals and then dropping in my colour. So I'm showing this pretty much at real time for this first petal, just so you can see how I'm doing it. So I'm using a brush. This is, I think it's a size 6, it might be a 4. You could use a larger brush for this image because it's really big and it's got some great open space. So use the largest brush you think you can keep control over. And then you'll see that I'm focusing on petals that are not touching each other. I've sped it up quite significantly here and then dropping that colour in. Hot press watercolour cardstock means that the paint dries pretty quickly, so you can go back and colour in a petal that's next to another one you've already coloured not more than a minute, 2 minutes later. If you colour in petals that are right next to each other, one after the other, you'll find the colour bleeds into each petal and you don't get that contrast build-up that you might be looking for. So I did my first layer with that kind of pale lemon colour, and then I've come back in with a slightly more orangey tone once that first layer had dried, just to add a little bit of contrast and shadow where some of those petals fold over. And then I'm going to do the same with the leaves in a pale green, then a darker green, and then the center is a pale brown. And then for a little bit more contrast, I've come in with these fine liners. These are, I think they're Stabilo. And I'm just going to draw in some contrast right into where all those nooks and crannies are. And because these markers are water-based, I'm going to pull them out a little bit with my water brush just to blend them in, just to add that extra bit of contrast, so you can see that what you're left with is this really pretty floral, lots of contrast, lots of depth, and I just fussy cut it out with my scissors. To trim out the sentiment, I'm using this rectangle die. This is from the Essential Rectangles Nestabilities from Spellbinders. I thought it was a good chunky size to cut out that Miss You sentiment, and I'm just going to run it through my Platinum 6 die cutting machine just to die cut it out really quickly. And then it's just a matter of putting my card together. So I'm going to attach the panel that is now obviously dry with some craft foam. I've got this craft foam that I bought in a big stack, lots of different colours. It's self-adhesive. I've trimmed it down to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and I'm applying it directly onto a white note card, which is top folding, and then I'm going to add some double-sided adhesive and pop my panel onto the top of that, and it will keep it in place really well. If any of that craft foam peeps out the edges, you can always trim it down with a paper trimmer. And then to add my floral over the top, which I fussy cut out, I'm going to use these Fun Stampers Journeys foam squares, and that will go down in the bottom left hand corner, and that way that embossed glittered piece just peeps out and provides that nice backdrop to that floral image. And then I did do another leaf from the stamp set. I trimmed that out as well, and I'm just going to pop that with some foam tape behind that flower. And then the sentiment I'm going to attach with some foam tape up in the top right hand corner. I didn't want to cover up any of that embossed piece or the flower. And then as a finishing touch, I'm going to add some glitter drops just here and there to add a little bit more sparkle and to tie in with that background. And that finishes my first card. Now I've grabbed the panel that I created at the start of this video, the Honeycomb panel, and I'm going to attach it to a white note card in the same way as before. That's with the yellow craft foam. I just like using coloured craft foam because if someone looks in at the side, they can see that coordinating colour, you know. That's the stickler for the details that I am. And then to finish this card, I'm going to use one of the block prints. So this butterfly one really sang to me. I really like the prettiness of it with that kind of modern feel. And I'm going to stamp it down onto some whipped cream cardstock from Fun Stamper's Journey using embossing ink. I have treated this panel of cardstock with a powder tool. And then I'm going to heat emboss it in gold sparkle embossing powder, and because this has got a lot of glitter in it, I'm going to heat it from below with my heat tool to melt it, avoid any of that glitter blowing off. And then to die cut this out, I have a set of Spellbinders classic squares dies, and one of them fits perfectly around this block print image. You might have other square dies from Spellbinders in your stash, and I recommend you try them out and see which one fits. I've popped it up onto the centre of my honeycomb panel with some foam squares. And then for my sentiment, I'm using the Sweet Friend sentiment. I'm using it on a scrap of black licorice cardstock from Fun Stamper's Journey, adding it with embossing ink using acrylic block, and then heat embossing it in white embossing powder. I'll trim it out and then use a few foam squares just to pop it into the upper right hand corner of the card, and that almost finishes. I am going to have to add some bling though, and I went and grabbed some of these sparkle drops from Fun Stamper's Journey. These are like a really pretty kind of, it's hard to explain, rough glass or plastic glass looking drop, and I just thought they were perfect with this honeycomb. Great colour, went with this perfectly, and that finishes my second card. Now this third card is going to be a very clean and simple card, just to show some of the extra, some of the stamps that you've got in this project kit and what you can do with them. So I've grabbed some acrylic blocks and I'm going to use this honeycomb stamp. It's a small stamp, but you can interlock it pretty easily by lining it up and create different background looks. So you could complete the whole background with that stamp. I'm using 3 different colours of yellow ink from light to dark, and I've stamped it in a kind of the bottom right hand side of the card up to the top corner. And then I've grabbed my black licorice ink and I'm stamping some of the bees and the sentiment in black ink as well. I'm using whipped cream cardstock panel here, cut to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And then to add a bit of interest, I'm going to dry emboss the honeycomb stencil. I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum 6 platform, and I'm using the sandwich that is used to emboss a die, except instead of a die, I'm going to be using my stencil. So the sandwich I'm using is applying my stencil. Then I'm going to add my cardstock with the stamped panel face down, the side that I want to dry emboss. You can see I actually started this card once before on the back, but waste not, want not. Add my rubber mat over the top and then an embossing plate, and then roll it through my die cutting machine. And then when you take it off the platform, you will see that that stencil has dry embossed into the cardstock, and it has this wonderful textured look that mimics that stencil. It's really nice to touch as well. And then I'm just going to pop that panel onto a white note card with some dry adhesive. And then to add a little bit of bling, I'm going to use the Fun Stamper's Journey Fashion Gold dots, and these are all in different sizes, and they're really good. There's a silver version as well, just for adding that little subtle touch of bling. Gold or silver goes with anything. And that finishes my third card. I hope this has given you some inspiration for using the Buzzworthy Project Kit and the supplies it contains. Be sure to check out the Spellbinders blog for more inspiration, and have a wonderful day. Bye.